everybody, it's Lori again, and welcome back to my kitchen. As you may or may not know, I got an absolutely amazing large gift of green bell peppers. So I have been busy preserving them in all sorts of different ways. I actually dehydrated the majority of them, and I made a couple of recipes up, one of which was stuffed bell pepper soup, which we'll put the link down in the description of this video if you're interested in that one. And today I would like to share another one of Amber May's recipes with you. And Amber May is the founder of the group SNUG, that's S-N-U-G, Canning to Preserve Our Future, on Facebook. So today's recipe credit goes to Amber May, and it is a wonderful recipe for beef fajitas. And of course, you know, with fajitas, you have all of the wonderful bell peppers and onions along with your meat and seasoning. And if you're wondering if you can this, yes, you can. So I'm just going to get started right away. And the first thing I want to share with you is the recipe for the actual dry fajita seasoning, all right, that she has provided. And her recipe for the fajita seasoning is 1 tablespoon of chili powder, 2 teaspoons of ground cumin, 2 teaspoons of smoked paprika, 2 teaspoons of garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of sugar, 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper. Now you just mix all of that seasoning together, and that is your fajita seasoning. All right, so now let's get to the actual fajita canning recipe. And what that calls for is 5 pounds of flank or sirloin steak cut into strips, 3 onions sliced, 5 bell peppers, red, yellow, green, orange, whatever you want to use, or a combination of all of them, sliced, and 1 tablespoon of that fajita seasoning that I just shared with you. Alrighty, so that is all there is to it, guys. Not a whole lot of complication there at all. But what you do first is you take your meat and you cut that into strips. And what I did is I just went ahead and I cut my beef into strips and I put it into a Ziploc bag, okay? And then you pour in that measurement of fajita seasoning, and I just kind of squished it all over the place and made sure that everything was really well coated. And then I stuck that in the refrigerator overnight to just kind of marinate and take on all of those flavors, those wonderful fajita seasoning flavors. All right, and at that point in time, then after you've allowed that meat to marinate at least overnight, then what we're going to do is we're just going to come down to the stove here, and you can see that I just put a little bit of lard or bacon grease, or whatever you want to use as oil. I just put a little bit of that in my pan, and we're just going to quickly saute up these beef slices. Now, we don't necessarily want to cook these all the way through, okay? We don't want to get them well done. What we're doing is we're just kind of setting the texture of the meat, okay? When you raw pack meat, most times it comes out like it's been cooked in a crock pot for hours on end, so it's very soft, and a lot of times it will just kind of fall apart. And for a fajita, you kind of want that meat that you can actually, you've got enough chew in your mouth that you can just really tell that, hey, I'm eating a beef fajita here. So I'm just going to take my marinated overnight meat in that fajita seasoning, and I'm just going to lightly saute these just to kind of get the outsides of them slightly sealed with the heat, but I'm not going to cook them all the way through. So I'm going to get that done, and then I will be back. All right, so I figured I'd come back and just kind of show you what I'm talking about, just lightly sauteing or just lightly searing your meat, okay? I am not cooking this through. I am just searing it to kind of get a little bit of a cooked outside, but I don't want the insides cooked completely, because your meat is what you are going to depend on rendering juices in your canning jar in the final canning product. So I am just very quickly just searing these small pieces of strips of meat, and that doesn't take very long at all. So be very attentive. Don't let them cook too much, but get that nice seared outside on them. And the reason why I'm using such a large pan is I am also going to lightly saute my onions and my peppers after I've got my meat done. And so I'm just going to use the same container. And I needed a large one for all of the onions and peppers that I have. So that's why I'm not using necessarily a frying pan. I'm using a big pot. But literally just maybe a minute or two on each side, just to seal that meat up. And like I said, it sets the texture of the meat also, so that you're not going to come out with like a beef stew type piece of meat. It's going to be more of a solid, chewable piece of meat. This is the difference between, like I said, between raw packing and pre-cooked. Pre-cooked meats have a little bit more mouth texture or mouth feel to them. Leave them for a few more seconds here. And that should be good enough. So as you can see, not a real long cooking period at all. Just enough to sear that meat and kind of seal it. All right, so I'm going to continue cooking all of my meat, and I'll be back in a few minutes. All right, so I've got all of my my meat sauteed up or seared up, and I'm just going to add, there's a little bit of grease in that pan, but not as much as I'd like to see. And so I'm just going to add a little fresh grease, and then I am going to saute all of my fresh green bell peppers, which we have sliced into nice little fajita type strips. And the only thing that we're doing on these is we're just trying to soften them up just a little bit so that they're going to be a little bit easier to pack into our canning jar. So we're not really trying to cook these either. We're just going to get them to the stage where they're just a little softened up and a little bit more flexible so that they'll be able to easier to be packed. So I'm just going to give them about 2 or 3 minutes in the pan, and I'll get the rest of those done, and I'm going to move on then, and I'm going to do the same thing with my sliced onions. I'm just going to saute them a little bit to get them softened up too. And at that point in time, then I'll be back. So I've got my peppers just lightly sauteed, and I did have to add just a tiny bit more oil to my pan after they were all done. And now I'm just going to do the same with all of my onions. I'm just going to saute them lightly just to soften them and get them a bit more flexible so that it's a little easier packing them into the jar. We can fit a little bit more in. If you pack them raw, it's fine to do that, but you are going to have a little bit of shrinkage, and you'll have a little extra space in your jar after the canning process is done. So I just prefer to kind of soften my peppers and my onions just a little bit before I get them packed in there, because then I can have a denser packed jar and not have any wasted jar space. So I'm going to continue sauteing these until they are softened, and then I'll be back. All right, so I'm back. My meat has been seared, and I have sauteed just lightly all of my onions and green bell peppers. Now, like I said, you can have a mixture of yellow and red, whatever you want to use as far as bell peppers. It's just I had green ones to use up, and so that's what I'm using today. Now everything's kind of had a little bit of a chance to cool down, so I'm going to be able to go ahead and just handle this stuff and stuff my jars with my hands mostly. And what you're going to want to do is with your 5 pounds of meat, you should be able to get approximately a pound of meat, and then the combination of the peppers and the onions into each jar. You should come out with 4 or 5 pint jars. Now I have a couple additional jars today because I sauteed up extra onions and peppers. I have a bag of leftover just plain ground beef. I was making some soup the other day to can, and I have 2 pounds of leftover ground beef. I am also going to make fajitas out of this pre-cooked and drained ground beef today. So I did add a few extra onions and peppers over what you will have for just a single recipe. But a single recipe should net you at least 4 to 5 quarts with that 5 pounds of beef that you sliced and sauteed up. So now all we're going to do is we're just going to equally distribute the meat and the onions and peppers into our jars. And so I'm just going to kind of go ahead and do it little by little here. I'm going to put 3 or 4 pieces of meat in each jar just to start. And then we're going to go ahead and follow up with some onions and peppers. Just equally distributed. And then we're going to follow up with more strips of meat. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of pack that down nice and tight just with my hands. If you want to use like the end of a spoon or something, you go ahead and do that. But pack those in really nice and tight, okay? With your small mouth jars, you'll probably have to use a spoon, which I think I'm going to have to do. So we'll get this spoon down in there and just pack that thing down in there nice and tight. Okay, on top of our meat, then we're just going to go ahead and distribute some more of the wonderful onion and bell pepper mix. And like I said, this is also why I kind of like to allow this stuff to cool off, because it's just a little bit easier working with your hands, especially with these long strings of onions and peppers. It's easier than trying to deal with a spoon or a spatula. And then before I put in my last bits of meat, I've got a really greasy hand here from this. You know what? I'm going to have to go wash. I'll be right back. All right, so I'm back. Well, now I got that lid greasy from before I washed. Oh my goodness. All right, before I pack in that last bit of meat, I really love this fajita mix flavoring. Now, you know, if this is your first time doing this, this is just an option that I opt to do. I like the flavoring, and so I'm going to add just a little bit more of that fajita mix flavoring into each jar. just because I really, really like it, and I like it to be flavorful. We're not afraid of flavor in our house. So I just sprinkled in just a little bit more of the dry fajita mix. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to top off and equally distribute the rest of the meat. I'm going to tear this one in half here. Put one in each jar. All right, and we want to bring this up to 1 inch headspace. So if you have a little bit more room, you can add a few more of those onions and peppers. And this is going to cook down a little bit in the canning process. So like I said, do not be afraid of really mashing this stuff in there, okay? And this is why I prefer to saute my onions and my peppers, because it makes them a little bit softer and a little bit easier just to get into those jars, nice and compacted. And as you can see, they're not fully cooked, okay? They're not fully cooked at all. It just kind of makes them just a little bit more pliable to saute those onions and peppers. All right, so I'm back one more time from the kitchen sink, and as you can see, I have really packed that meat and the onions and peppers in those jars nice and compacted. Okay, our meat will render a little bit of juice because it is not fully cooked. We just seared the outside. Our onions and our peppers are going to add just a little bit of juice to this jar also. But one last thing that I do is, if I have a little meat juice left over from just allowing my meat to cool, I just add a little touch of that meat juice to each one of these jars. It adds a little flavor and it adds a little additional fluid just to make sure that everything is going to come out good and covered. There we go. All right, so then like any other canning process, we are just going to wipe the jars and place our lids. That's another thing I forgot. My clean lids are sitting alongside of the sink, so I'm going to have to go and grab those also. So I'll get them all wiped off here. Make sure we have no food particles, no grease going on. And I'm going to go grab those clean flats and some rings. Okay guys, I guess it's not one of those days where I'm really put together and in order here today. But anyway, so we have wiped the rims of our jars, and now we're just simply going to place our lids and rings fingertip tight. Now today I am using once again the Superb canning lids, and I'm telling you guys, if you have not tried these lids, please go out and buy you some online and give them a try. They are so good. They are just amazing quality. I have had absolutely zero failures with them. They're heavier than probably most of the lids you've ever experienced, unless you're a really old canner and you were canning back in the 70s and 80s like I am. But for today's new lids, these Superb canning lids are absolutely amazing, and I highly recommend them. Now I'm just going to set these aside just for a minute, and I'm going to go on to also, like I said, I've got this ground beef that I would like to just get canned up and saved before it goes bad. It was just sitting in my refrigerator for a day. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing as with the beef strips. I'm just going to layer my ground beef and my fajitas, you know, the peppers and onions, into these canning jars just in layers. And then I'm going to add a little bit of that seasoning also. get those onions and peppers in. All right, I guess I'm just gonna have to sacrifice my towel. I'm tired of running to the sink, you guys. So this towel is done. I'm gonna have to wash it after this, but that's okay. All right, so then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and I am going to add a tablespoon to each jar of my fajita mix, maybe a little bit more, a tablespoon and a half, because I have not pre-seasoned my meat at all, my ground beef. It's just plain ground beef. Alrighty, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a little bit more meat on top of that and get it mashed down in there. Now we're going to want to pack this tight just like we did with our beef strips. So get that in there really good. All right, that looks pretty good. Now I had 2 pounds of ground beef in this bag, and I have fit almost all of it into these canning jars. So this is approximately 1 pound of beef, browned beef per quart jar. And I think I might add just a few more onions and peppers and maybe just a little bit more meat. Get them pressed down in there really good. Like I said, you know, now things are going to reduce a little bit in the actual processing inside the canner. So you really want to pack these in there so that you don't lose a whole lot of space in your jar. With the cooking, everything kind of shrinks. So make sure that you're really compacting it down really tight so that your area of shrinkage is going to be a little bit less. And I'll see if I can fit in. Yeah, I think that's all the more full I want that jar. Fit in just a little bit more meat here on the top. Oh, you guys, that looks really, really good. Okay, so technically, out of those 2 pounds of ground beef, I only have less than 1/2 of a cup of ground beef left. And I'm not going to push it. I'm not going to overfill my jars just to use up that little bit of meat, just simply because I don't want overflow issues or siphoning issues. Okay, so to this now I am going to add either just a little touch of water or a little touch of broth. And I technically do not have any broth open today, so I'm just going to get a little bit of water just to add to these jars, and I'll be right back. All right, I'm back with my water. Now, again, the reason why I'm just adding just a little touch of water is just to make sure that I have enough finished juice in my jar when my jars are completed in their processing. Now, in the ground beef itself is already pre-cooked, and so it's not going to render a whole lot of juice. The onions and the green bell peppers will render a little bit, but not enough, and so that's why I put in, I would say maybe 2 tablespoons of water per each quart jar, okay? Just to make sure that we have a little bit of fluid in there. I just want to make sure that there's no air in that one. Just to make sure that we have enough fluid to cover all of our meat and everything when we're done. All right, so that is my makeshift fajitas with the cooked ground beef. And you know, for extra measure, I might even, just instinct is telling me that that is a lot of meat for that little bit of flavoring that I put in there. I might even put in just a little bit more flavoring. And this is all instinct, you guys. I don't really have measurements for you. But that's how things roll in my kitchen. Okay, so we have these last 2 jars ready to go with our ground beef fajitas. And we have our regular strips of fajita meat, and all of our wonderful stuff is packed and ready to go. Now it's pretty hot here again today, and so I am going to be going ahead and taking these outside onto the porch, and I am going to pressure can these out on my Camp Stove 2 outdoor stove. Now, pressure canning, you can do these in pints, okay? Just, you know, use the same directions. Just layer that meat and those veggies all the way through that jar. Pack them really tight. Add maybe 1 tablespoon of water per pint and maybe 2 tablespoons of water per quart. But anyway, for pressure canning, your pints will be 75 minutes. Your quarts will be 90 minutes. Or you can hot water bath either size jar for 3 hours. So I'm going to go ahead and get these outside and get them started. And I will be back when the canning process is complete, and I'll show you the beautiful results. I'll see you in a while. Alrighty, so I am back, and I pressure canned the jars for 90 minutes. I'll just let you see how beautiful these are. Now I haven't even washed my jars off yet. This is still actually even kind of warm. But you can still see that the onions and green peppers are still intact. Now, like I said that there would be, there is quite a bit of shrinkage, just simply because that meat and those vegetables were not fully cooked when we put them in this jar. And so in the pressure canning and cooking period inside the canner, things do shrink a little bit. But it's just beautiful. And I'm going to pop this jar open for you here and dump it out in a bowl. And that is one of those wonderful, superb jar lids, guys. I'm sure you heard that great vacuum and pop of the lid as I opened it up. Set this off over here. So here is our fajitas. Now I would drain the juice off, of course, before putting this on a tortilla to enjoy with a little bit of sour cream and fresh lettuce and maybe some fresh tomatoes. But look at how great this is. Now, because we partially, we seared that meat, the meat actually is a little bit more solid than if you raw pack, all right? So if I can get one on my fork here, you can just see it's a lot more solid when you sear or partially cook your meat. And so this is a great consistency inside of a tortilla. And yes, your peppers and onions do get soft, but they are still whole. They have not just completely dissolved into nothing, okay? They are definitely still peppers and onions. This just smells amazing. It tastes amazing. This is just a really awesome thing to have on your shelf for a quick and easy meal. And it's so tasty, guys. Just wonderful. Amber also has recipes for both chicken fajitas and actually fish fajitas that you can. And so once again, I and Amber and all the rest of the admin team and all of the members just invite you to come and join us on the Snug group in Facebook, where you will find more of these types of wonderful canning recipes. So that is it for today. I would like to personally thank you for spending your time with me again. God bless you all, and happy canning, everybody.